The desert hides many secrets, and tonight, one of them is about to awaken. Stay until the end. You won't believe what happens next. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The wind screamed across the endless desert, carrying thin spirals of sand that rose like ghosts before dissolving into the heat. The sun hovered mercilessly above, turning every grain of sand into a burning spark. In the middle of that lifeless expanse, a single wooden cross stood crookedly from the earth, and to it a man was bound. His name was Seagal. Thick ropes held his arms wide, wrists scraped raw by friction, feet tied tightly together. His head hung low, his long hair dusted with sand. At first glance he looked broken, another nameless soul abandoned to the desert's cruelty. 20 yards away, a group of bikers lounged beside their motorcycles. The metallic gleam of their bikes reflected the sun like knives. The patches on their leather vests read, "Black Vipers," a name whispered with fear on the outskirts of small towns. They laughed, drank from metal cans, and tossed the empties into the sand. The leader, Maddox Crane, paced before the cross with the lazy confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Scars traced his face like crude maps of violence, and when he grinned, a single gold tooth caught the light. His voice cut through the desert air. "You boys ever seen a man so quiet?" The gang burst into laughter, enjoying their leader's cruel humor. Seagal didn't move. He looked like a statue carved from exhaustion, but behind his lowered eyelids, something remained sharp. Maddox swaggered closer, the sand crunching under his boots. "You hear me, old man," he said, tapping the side of the cross with his knife. "Nothing to say? Not even a prayer?" Still silence. The leader smirked and turned to his men. "Guess the heat cooked his tongue." More laughter. The sound carried across the barren land like a mockery of life itself. Hours earlier, they had found him walking alone on a cracked highway. They hadn't cared who he was. They needed to make an example. Show anyone who crossed the Vipers what happened to strangers on their road. Maddox had chosen him simply because he looked calm, and calmness offended men who thrived on chaos. They tied him up, built their crude stage, and left him for the sun to finish. Now Maddox returned to his entertainment. "You must think you're tough," he said, leaning close enough for Seagal to feel the heat of his breath. "Out here, you're nothing." He flicked open a knife and placed the tip under Seagal's chin. The blade glimmered as he lifted the man's head. Seigal's eyes opened, gray, focused, and unsettlingly calm. "Why?" he whispered. Maddox blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "Why what?" Seigal's voice was steady, quiet, too controlled for a man at the edge of death. "Why waste your life hurting others?" the bikers jeered. Rocco, a thick-necked brute with a voice like gravel, stepped forward. "You want to see hurt?" He swung his fist into Seigal's ribs, the sound dull and heavy. Seagal flinched only slightly, not from pain, but from patience thinning. Rocco laughed and turned to the others. "That's better." Maddox shoved him back. "Easy, Rocco. Don't break the toy too soon." Seagal spoke again, breathing evenly despite the pain. "You still have a choice. Walk away." Maddox's grin vanished. He didn't like that calm tone, didn't like the control behind it. "We don't walk away from anything," he snapped. "You think you know us?" Seagal's gaze met his. "I know what you are, a man pretending not to be afraid." The words hit like a stone. The laughter faltered. Rocco raised his fist again, but Maddox stopped him with a gesture. "Not yet," he said. "Let him cook under the sun a while. By sunset, he'll be begging for mercy." The gang wandered back to their bikes, opening new bottles, the sound of metal and laughter echoing over the sand. Seagal lowered his head again, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. inside, the storm began to turn. Every detail mattered. The tension in the knots, the grain of the wood, the shadow angles, the rhythm of the wind, the position of every man around him. He was counting, memorizing, calculating. Pain dulled, focus sharpened. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, painting the horizon in shimmering waves. Sweat ran into his eyes. Each small movement made the ropes dig deeper into his skin, yet his mind stayed razor clear. When a man is caged, a master does not despair. He studies his cage. The ropes that bound him were old, stretched by heat. The post was sun-cracked, ready to splinter. The sand beneath him held a half-buried stone, sharp enough to cut if he could reach it. He measured distances, timing, temperaments. Maddox watched him occasionally, trying to read his face, but finding only stillness. That unnerved him. He spat into the sand and barked at his men to start their engines for fun, letting the noise roll across the emptiness. But even the roar of bikes couldn't drown the faint hum building inside Seagal's mind, the hum of intent. As the afternoon dragged toward evening, the desert shifted colors, turning gold and red. The vipers began to gather again, restless and ready for more cruelty. Maddox stretched his shoulders and grinned. "All right, boys, let's finish the show." The gang moved closer, forming a half-circle around the cross. Dust swirled around their boots like smoke. Maddox flicked his knife again and leaned in. "Last chance, old man. Any final words?" Seagal lifted his head slowly. The shadows lengthened across his face, hiding everything but his eyes. "You still have time to leave," he said quietly. Maddox barked a laugh. "You think you're in control?" "I know I am," Seagal replied. The calmness in his voice chilled the air. Rocco shoved him in the chest. "Big talk for a scarecrow." Seagal didn't move, only spoke softer, each word deliberate. "You're going to untie me. You don't know when or why, but you will." The laughter faded to confusion. Maddox stepped close, trying to shake off a rising unease. "You think we're stupid enough to free you?" Seagal's voice dropped to a whisper. "You already made your last mistake." For the first time, Maddox hesitated. Something in those words felt like a sentence already passed. The desert wind howled again, carrying the first cool hint of twilight. The gang leader forced a grin, raising his pistol toward Seagal's face. "Maybe we don't wait for the sun, huh?" He cocked the gun. Seagal didn't blink. "You won't pull that trigger," he said. "Why not?" "Because deep down, you know who I am." The leader's hand trembled. Recognition flickered behind his eyes. But before he could speak, the distant growl of an engine broke through the air, a truck speeding toward them, headlights blazing. Maddox turned, shouting orders. The others scrambled, reaching for weapons. Dust rose in thick clouds as the truck screeched to a stop nearby. The chapter ends with chaos about to erupt. Bikers yelling, engines roaring, sand flying, while Seagal remains bound to the cross, motionless, eyes open now, alive with the calm certainty of a man who has already begun his escape. The roar of the truck's engine echoed through the empty desert as it skidded to a halt, throwing a wave of dust over the black vipers. For a brief second, none of them moved. Then the door swung open and a massive figure jumped out, charging straight into the gang like a thunderclap. Maddox shouted, but his voice was swallowed by chaos. The bikers scrambled for their weapons, engines sputtered, and the desert exploded into noise and confusion. Amid the whirlwind, Steven Seagal lifted his head. His eyes narrowed. This was the distraction he had waited for. The ropes dug deep into his wrists, but he ignored the pain. He twisted, testing the tension. Every flex, every breath loosened the fibers just enough. His muscles coiled with precision, not desperation. The fight raged 20 yards away. His ally moved through the bikers like a storm, his fists heavy and deliberate. One man went down, clutching his throat. Another crashed into a motorcycle, the machine toppling onto him with a metallic shriek. Maddox drew his pistol, firing wildly into the dust. The gunshots cracked like thunder, but each bullet missed its mark. The chaos blinded him to the quiet man on the cross, working silently against his restraints. Seagal's breathing slowed. He twisted his wrists again, hard enough to draw blood. A single thread snapped, then another. The rope stretched under the strain of heat and motion, until at last, one hand slipped free. Pain flooded his arm, but freedom overrode it. He reached across, fingers finding the other knot, pulling until it loosened. His hand slipped, grabbed again. One sharp twist, and the rope fell away. For a moment he hung there, suspended between the past and the present, then dropped from the cross, landing softly in the sand. His feet steadied. He tore the remaining strands from his wrists and looked around. The gang hadn't noticed. Their attention was fixed on the brawl unfolding near the bikes. His ally fought with brutal elegance, using the terrain, throwing opponents into the sand, never wasting motion. Seagal picked up a jagged piece of the broken rope and studied it briefly before letting it fall. He didn't need weapons. He was one. He began to move forward, silent, balanced. Every step left barely a trace on the sand. The nearest biker turned too late. Seagal's hand caught his wrist mid-swing, redirected the motion, and sent the man sprawling. Another rushed in, shouting. Seagal sidestepped, let him pass, then swept his leg and dropped him hard. The impact echoed like a drumbeat in the dust. Maddox spun around, eyes wide. What? How? His words broke as he saw the empty cross behind him. The world seemed to tilt. Seagal was free. Get him! Maddox screamed, but fear cracked his voice. The Vipers obeyed, though not eagerly. Two of them charged, one with a chain, the other wielding a crowbar. Seagal waited until they were close, then moved. The chain slashed the air. He caught it, twisted, and pulled the biker off balance, using his own strength against him. The second man swung the crowbar downward, but Seagal stepped aside, letting the weapon bury itself in the sand. A sharp elbow to the ribs, a flick of the wrist, and both men were down. His motions were precise, surgical, and unhurried. Maddox backed away, shouting for the rest to close in. The gang circled, unsure whether to attack or flee. Seigal's ally rejoined him, wiping blood from his knuckles. They exchanged a wordless glance, the calm understanding of men who had fought together before. Maddox fired again, missing both times. The bullets hit the wood of the cross, splintering it into shards. Seagal didn't flinch. He advanced one step at a time. You should have walked away, he said. Maddox reloaded with shaking hands. Stay back, he barked, but his courage faltered. The gun jammed. He cursed and threw it aside, turning to run. Seigal's ally intercepted him, knocking him flat into the sand. The battle ended as quickly as it began. Bodies littered the ground, groaning or unconscious. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and fear. The only sound left was the wind. Seagal stood over Maddox, who struggled to sit up. The leader's bravado had drained away, leaving only confusion and disbelief. You don't understand, he muttered. You don't know who you're dealing with. Seagal looked down at him, calm but cold. Neither did you. He crouched, eyes level with his defeated enemy. You tied a man to a cross to prove you had power. Now tell me, what did it prove? Maddox swallowed hard, unable to answer. His hands trembled as he tried to brush the sand from his face. The silence stretched between them until Seagal spoke again. You think strength is about control. It's not. Real strength is knowing when to stop. He rose and turned away, signaling to his friend. The man nodded and headed for the truck. Get up, Seagal said to Maddox. The leader hesitated, then obeyed. You want to live? Then learn. Fear doesn't make men obey forever. It only makes them wait for the day they stop being afraid. Maddox said nothing. His men avoided his eyes. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Seagal glanced once more at the ruined cross, then back at the gang. "Remember this," he said quietly. "You had your chance to walk away. You'll never get one like it again." He turned, stepping into the fading sunlight. His ally climbed behind the wheel of the truck. Seagal paused at the passenger door, looking over the battlefield one last time. The Vipers lay broken and silent. Maddox stared after him, chest heaving. Seagal's final words carried through the wind like a sentence carved into stone. "If you harm another innocent soul, I will know, and I will return." The engine started, rumbling steady and low. The truck rolled forward, its tires crushing the sand, where Seagal had once hung helpless. The wind swept away the footprints behind them, leaving only the shattered cross standing alone against the horizon. Maddox dropped to his knees, the weight of his own choices pressing down. The sun dipped beneath the dunes, bleeding its last light across the desert. In the distance, the truck became a small, moving shadow, fading into the coming night. The first stars appeared, watching silently as the storm that had been tied to a cross drove away, ready for whatever waited next. The night fell over the desert like a heavy curtain, the air cooling rapidly as silence replaced the chaos of the fight. The broken cross stood alone, leaning slightly, surrounded by scattered bikes and groaning men. The truck rumbled away, its red taillights fading into the darkness. Inside, Steven Seagal sat quietly, his body still and his breathing even. His ally, hand steady on the wheel, glanced sideways. "You all right?" he asked. Seagal nodded once. "I'm fine." His voice carried no triumph, only certainty. He looked out the window at the endless horizon. "They'll remember this night," he said quietly. "Maybe that's enough." The ally grunted. "You really think they'll change?" Seagal didn't answer. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, and the stars above looked down like silent witnesses. By dawn, the truck reached an abandoned outpost, a small shelter built from wood and stone. They parked there, far from the road, and stepped out. The air was cool now, the sand almost silver under the first light of morning. Seagal moved slowly, not from pain but from thought. His wrists were raw where the ropes had cut, yet his posture was straight. His friend handed him a bottle of water. "Rest," he said, but Seagal shook his head. "Evil doesn't rest," he replied. "It hides. It waits." He sat on a rock near the doorway, watching the sunrise bleed across the sky. Back at the ambush site, Maddox Crane stirred. His mind was fogged with exhaustion and humiliation. Around him, the remnants of the Black Vipers began to wake, muttering curses and confusion. The laughter that had once filled the desert was gone. Shame hung over them like dust. Maddox rubbed his face, staring at his trembling hands. He tried to speak, but no words came. Every movement reminded him of the man who had stood unbroken in the heat and stormed through them like a force of nature. He looked at the empty horizon and felt something foreign, a trace of regret. The others gathered around him, waiting for orders. For the first time, he had none. When the truck returned hours later, the sound of the engine carried long before the men saw it. They tensed, some reaching for fallen weapons, but Maddox lifted a hand. "No," he said, his voice hoarse. "No more fighting." The truck stopped a short distance away, and Seagal stepped out. His friend stayed near the cab, arms crossed, ready if needed. Seagal walked toward the group, his shadow stretching over the sand. No gun, no blade, just calm authority. Maddox felt his pulse quicken. Every instinct screamed to run, but he stayed where he was. Seagal stopped a few feet away. "You're still alive," he said softly. "That means you still have a chance to make this mean something." Maddox swallowed hard. What do you want from us? Seagal's eyes never wavered. I want you to understand. He gestured toward the broken cross behind them. You did that to a man who had done nothing to you. You called it strength. It was fear. The words hit deeper than any blow. The gang shifted uneasily, their faces stripped of bravado. We don't fear anyone, Rocco muttered, though his voice trembled. Seagal looked at him. Then why did you tie me up instead of facing me? Rocco dropped his gaze. Maddox clenched his fists. You could have killed us, he said. Why didn't you? Seagal took a slow breath. Because killing you would have proved you right, that violence is the only answer. I wanted to show you something stronger. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. Mercy terrifies men who've never faced their own weakness. The silence was heavy. One by one, the bikers lowered their heads. Maddox felt the weight of their shame pressing into him. Seigel's tone hardened. You owe the world an apology. Maddox blinked. An apology? Yes, Seagal said. Not to me. To every soul you've hurt. You thought fear made you powerful. It only made you small. He turned to the others. All of you, say it. The gang hesitated. No one moved. Then Maddox dropped to his knees. We're sorry, he said quietly. The words tasted strange in his mouth, but he forced them out. For everything. His men followed, kneeling in a half-circle around him, muttering the same phrase, voices breaking with shame and exhaustion. The sound was raw, unpolished, real. Seagal nodded once, satisfied. For your sake, he said, be better men than you were this morning. He turned away, walking back toward the truck. None of them dared to move. The silence that followed wasn't fear, it was reflection. Maddox lifted his head, watching the man who had spared him. You'll just leave? He called out. Seagal paused, looking over his shoulder. For now. But if you go back to your old ways, I'll know. He tapped a finger to his temple. And I'll return. Maddox stared at him until the truck disappeared into the distance. The desert seemed quieter now, almost peaceful. Around him, his men began to stand, uncertain what to do next. He looked at the broken cross one more time. It loomed behind them like a monument to their failure, a reminder of what cruelty had cost them. Pick up the bikes, he said at last. We're done here. His voice carried new weight, stripped of swagger. The others obeyed without argument. By the time the sun reached its height, the black vipers were gone, leaving behind only the scarred sand and a memory they would never outrun. Far away, Seagal and his friend sat outside the shelter, the truck parked in the shade. The wind carried faint traces of dust and fuel. The fading breath of violence passed. The ally looked at Seagal. Do you think they'll keep their word? Seagal's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. That's their fight now, he said quietly. I've given them the choice. What they do with it will decide who they become. He stood, stretching his stiff shoulders. The desert stretched wide before them, endless and silent. This isn't over, he said. Cruelty doesn't die in one battle. It only sleeps. His ally nodded, starting the engine again. Then we'll be ready when it wakes. Seagal gave a small, grim smile. Always. The truck turned toward the open plain, rolling forward into the wind. Behind them, the sunrise burned brighter, washing away the darkness of the night before. The man who had been tied to a cross was free again, not just in body, but in purpose. He was the calm before every storm, and somewhere out there, another storm was waiting. Night returned to the desert, quiet but tense, the wind carrying the faint echo of engines far in the distance. Steven Seagal sat outside the small cabin, his wrists still raw, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The stars shimmered above. scattered across the sky like silent witnesses. Inside, his ally rested, but Seagal remained alert. He knew peace in the desert was an illusion. Evil never accepted defeat. It only waited for a second chance. When the sound of engines grew louder, he rose slowly, brushing the dust from his hands. His friend stepped outside beside him, already sensing what was coming. "They're back," he said. Seagal nodded, calm as ever. Then the lesson continues. The glow of headlights appeared over the dunes, a dozen bikes racing through the dark, engines growling with vengeance. The Black Vipers had returned, stronger, angrier, and desperate to reclaim their pride. Maddox Crane rode at the front, limping but alive, his face hardened by humiliation. The bike screeched to a halt in a wide circle around the cabin, the air filled with the smell of gasoline and fury. Maddox pointed at Seagal, his voice cracking with rage. "That's him! Take him down!" Seagal didn't move. He stood like a stone in the center of the storm, his ally stepping up beside him, ready but composed. The first biker charged forward, swinging a metal bat from his motorcycle. Seagal stepped forward and struck the front wheel with a precise kick. The bike flipped sideways, its rider crashing into the sand with a choked grunt. Two more came together, one aiming high, the other low, trying to overwhelm him. Seagal pivoted between them, redirecting their attack so they collided midair, tumbling in a tangle of noise and dust. "Freedom," he murmured, as if speaking to himself. His ally moved with equal precision, meeting two others with raw power, his punches landing like hammers. Each blow sent a biker sprawling, the rhythm of their assault collapsing into chaos. The night filled with shouts and engines dying one by one. Maddox watched from behind the line, his hand trembling on the handle of his pistol. The memory of their last encounter haunted him. He shouted again, but this time his voice carried more fear than command. "Finish him." The bikers hesitated. Another rushed Seagal with a knife, shouting to hide his terror. Seagal caught the man's wrist, turned it inward, and disarmed him with a fluid motion. The blade fell to the sand, useless. The attacker dropped to his knees, gasping. Another tried to leap from his bike with a chain raised above his head, but Seagal stepped forward, caught him midair, and redirected his flight straight into Maddox. Both men crashed down in a heap. The circle of motorcycles broke apart. Engines sputtered. Riders backed away. The desert echoed with the sound of defeat. Seagal stood over Maddox again, his shadow long under the pale moonlight. Maddox struggled to crawl backward, his bravado gone, replaced by raw fear. "Stay away," he shouted, but Seagal only watched him, his expression unreadable. "You came back," Seagal said quietly. "Why?" Maddox's voice shook. "You humiliated us. I couldn't let it stand." Seagal crouched down, his eyes level with the broken leader. "I spared you," he said. "That was your second chance. And sparing a man is a greater act of strength than breaking him." Maddox's breathing quickened, his hands digging into the sand. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Seagal's tone was calm but cutting. "I want you to stop. Stop hurting people. Stop pretending your violence makes you powerful. You're running from the weakness inside you." For a long moment, no one moved. The gang members, bruised and beaten, watched their leader kneel before the man they once mocked. Maddox lowered his head. The weight of shame pressed down harder than any fist. "I don't know how," he whispered. Seagal reached out and lifted his chin with two fingers, forcing him to meet his gaze. "The same way anyone learns," he said. "One step at a time." He gestured toward the horizon, where dawn was beginning to bleed into the sky. "You can still walk a different road." Maddox's eyes glistened with something new. Understanding? Maybe even hope. "You think there's anything left in me worth saving?" he asked. Seagal nodded once. "You didn't kill me when you had the chance. That means there's still something human left. Seagal stood and looked at the remaining bikers, their faces pale in the fading darkness. "You've followed this man into emptiness," he said. "But you can choose something else. The world doesn't need more fear. It needs men who know when to stop." No one argued. No one raised a weapon. The sound of the desert wind replaced the noise of engines. Maddox wiped his face, the tears cutting through the dust on his skin. He looked at his crew, then back at Seagal. "What now?" he asked softly. "Now," Seagal replied, "you owe the world something. Go fix what you've broken. One apology at a time." The leader nodded slowly, a vow forming behind his tired eyes. Seagal stepped back, his friend joining him at his side. The black vipers began to stand, gathering their fallen bikes, moving quietly, no longer the loud predators they had been. Maddox climbed onto his motorcycle last, glancing back once. For the first time, gratitude flickered in his eyes. Seagal gave him a silent nod. The engines started, but they didn't roar. They murmured like confessions carried on the wind. The gang rode away, leaving tracks that the desert wind quickly began to erase. The noise faded into the horizon until only the whisper of sand remained. Seagal stood still for a long time, watching the fading dust. His ally crossed his arms, glancing at him. "You think they'll really change?" he asked. Seagal didn't take his eyes off the horizon. "That's their battle now," he said, "but at least they're walking in the right direction." The first light of sunrise painted the sand in gold. His ally smiled faintly. "So what now?" Seagal looked toward the rising sun, his expression calm. "There's always someone who needs help." They walked back to the truck together, engines rumbling softly as the day began anew. Behind them, the desert lay quiet once more, cleansed by the wind. Steven Seagal didn't look back. He didn't need to. His work was never done. Somewhere beyond the dunes, cruelty would rise again. And when it did, he would be there. The storm that brings justice to the world. The storm has passed, but this is only the beginning. What would you do in his place? Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice might inspire the next story.